Hello, fellow declutterers, and welcome to another episode of Decluttering 55 Plus with Michelle Passoff. Today, we have the pleasure of having as our guest author, journalist, and educator, Pia Marie Winters Jordan. We're going to be talking about the importance of recording life memories from a personal perspective and an historical perspective. Planning to prepare a memoir is on the Decluttering 55 Plus with Michelle Passoff agenda because it's something many 55 plusers will agree can be a benefit to our children, grandchildren, and even the world at large. However, more often than not, the notion of preserving our life story with all its experiences and lessons gets swept under the carpet and put off another day or forever. How do you get such an undertaking accomplished? It's daunting and therefore becomes clutter because the notion of sharing your life story becomes buried in the background where it stands to never see the light of day. Many of us don't think it's within our grasp. We hope that today we can change all that and encourage you out there to capture your life story in one form or another, one way or another, because it matters. After all, how many times have you wanted to know more about your moms, your dads, and your grandparents' stories? Lucky for us, Pia not only had the inspiration to tell her mom's story, but she had the know how. After earning an undergraduate degree in journalism and spending many years as a television reporter, producer, and director, Pia re entered academia as a professor of global journalism and communication at Morgan State University in Baltimore. One thing leading to another, Pia wrote and published the book called Memories of a Tuskegee Airman Nurse and Her Military Sisters, a book not only about her mother's experience as first lieutenant in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps at Tuskegee Army Airfield, it's tricky to say, during World War II, but a story of historical importance on so many levels. Pia is not only worked on the book, but also a documentary. Let's talk and find out about Pia's journey, and hopefully it will inspire your own. Pia, first of all, tell us how you started this project.
Okay, I'll tell you how. But first of all, University of Maryland, College Park, that's my undergraduate. My graduate degree was at American U, so I have to give my little cheer for them because without them, I would not have had the foundation to do this. Okay, now what was your question again?
How did you start a project documenting the Tuskegee Airman nurse journey?
Well, actually, my mother, she became ill. She was a widow. She had moved from her single family home into a apartment, independent apartment. And she became ill. She went from independence to a nursing home. So I was going through her things. I'm her only child. I was going through her things to close up her apartment. And I came across this scrapbook. I'd vaguely remember seeing the scrapbook before, but it'd been a while, probably since when I was a little girl or something. So I was going through it and I'm like, oh my goodness. My mother was with the Tuskegee Airmen, and since I was familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen and seeing her with airmen and, with a group of nurses, I said, "Oh my goodness, I never did anything at all, and I'm a journalist." And so I was like, "How could this be?" In the meantime, I had
Let
started.
me just stop you there for a minute, Pia. Can you give us a short definition of Tuskegee Air the
Okay,
the
the
Tuskegee Airmen?
the Tuskegee Airmen, actually, in the '40s, during World War II, they were pilot cadets. It was part of an experience. Excuse me, I got
Mhm.
to it was part of an experience to determine whether African American men were smart enough to fly military planes. That was the time it was in. We're talking about Jim Crow laws. However, after a push, lobbying by a lot of groups, and because it was still segregation, they built an army base just to train African American pilot cadets, who later became known as the Tuskegee Airmen in the 1950s. So at that time, they were learning to fly planes. So that's how the name came about and how they came about because It was an at first they were calling it an experiment, but not to confuse it with a different experiment. But the experience was really a test to see if
to see
black
whether or
men
not the
could
African American community men could
fly
fly a
military planes.
now the nurses were also black and
Yes.
were, how did that come about?
Well, the Army Nurse Corps, that's where the nurses were in the Army Air, because there was no Air Force then. If you were black, you couldn't get in. That was it. If you were black, you couldn't get in the Army Nurse Corps. The Red Cross was the recruiting arm of the Army Nurse Corps. You had to be uh, a member of the Red Cross. So if you couldn't get in the Red Cross, you couldn't get in the Army Nurse Corps. However, and then two, let me just explain this. To be in the Army Nurse Corps or to be in the American Red Cross, you had to have graduated from nursing school. You had to be a registered nurse. You had to be a member of a national organization of nursing. You had to be prepared. So one of the nurses, her name was Della Rainey, she wrote a letter after they told her she couldn't come in because she was black. She wrote a letter to the person in charge of the American Red Cross explaining, I want to serve my country. And you know what? They sent her uh, an enrollment form. They sent her her card to become a member. She was a member. Once she got in, she was the first African American woman in the Army Nurse Corps. Once she got in, that opened the door for others to come in. So that's
So
how
it
they
was
got in.
for your mother to be a part of this unit of nurses was an historical moment, and I'm wondering why you never were aware of this until, you were well into your adulthood, and she never spoke about it when you were a kid? You didn't grow up with the pride of knowing, the unique position that she had in history?
Nope, because my mother, when she was in the Army Nurse Corps, she was she wasn't married. I wasn't born. We came, all that came like 12 years later, 10 to 12 years later. She stayed in the military until 1952. So from 1943 to 1952, she was in the military. So there was no husband, no child. That was it. So I guess after she went into civilian life as a civilian nurse and got married, had children, it just never really it wasn't something where my mother would put me on my knee and say, "You know what? I used to do this." I would hear her talk to different people and I would ask, "Are you on the phone with someone from nursing school or when you were in the military?" But that was it. She did not sit me down and on her knee or whatever and say, "I'm gonna tell you some stories." No, that never happened.
No. So you discovered it when she was well into her 80s and moving into, the later years of her life, and when you had this, awareness that she was who she was, not only in terms of her own life, but in, breaking new ground as a woman in the military, in nursing, being, African American, what did you say to yourself?
I had started teaching at Morgan State University in Baltimore, and I was talking to a one of my new colleagues, someone I just met because I've done like lectures in academia, but I'd never been, the person who was there, who was actually going to be teaching. um, and so I told her, you know what? Because this was in 2008, I said, one of my regrets is I found out my mother was one of the Tuskegee Army nurses, and I never did anything. And if she hadn't said, well, why don't you start now? And you know what you have to do. And I said, I have to get the interviews because they're like in their late 80s, 90s. So from that moment on, she kind of pushed me. And by 2009, I was flying around trying to go into archives, interviewing airmen and the nurses who were still living. And that's how that started. So I guess I was in my 50s when I finally got around to doing something.
Well, she was the one that, pushed you, even if it was, a little late, you at least you got around to it.
Right.
Now, when your book is not really so much a memoir as it is almost an accounting. Who were these women? Where did they go to school? Where did they work? What were their positions in the military? When did they die? Um,
Where they grew up.
where were they buried? So, what was the importance to you of going beyond the parameters of your mother's own life to include the entire Corps? There were only 28 nurses, is that
Right, who
correct?
were stationed there. So
There. Okay.
even later, like my mother, they were reassigned other locations, and some of the nurses, they left. They didn't, stay in the military, but for those who stayed, they went on to other bases. The 28 nurses, I wanted to tell not only my mother's story, because I could say but so much about my mother, and I was saying, well, she was one of many. So I thought, why not? Let me just research what I know about the other.
Really many. There were only 28 of
Right,
them. So,
right.
uh,
At who were stationed at that base. And
yeah.
actually, at any one time, there were only 20 nurses. So, nurses were coming in, going out, reassigned to other locations. So, there were total, basically, at any one time, just 20, but a total of 28. So, but I thought, I couldn't find a lot on all of them, but I could find maybe a piece on each one. Some of them you'll see I have pages because when
Well, what to you, what was the importance? Okay, you not only had that these were African American women in the military, in nursing, all of those in and of themselves stand out as um, pivotal moments in history. Was there anything else about them that is noteworthy that we should all be aware of?
I'm glad you asked. When you went into the Army Nurse Corps, you went in as a second lieutenant. That's an officer. When my mother left, she had been raised to a first lieutenant. But keep in mind the Tuskegee Airmen, the men who would become known as Tuskegee Airmen, they were pilot cadets. They had no rank. They saluted the nurses. And I got a lot of stories. People have to get the book to read all the stories, but I got stories.
So, wait, this is a copy of the book here.
Okay, yeah.
It's Memories of a Tuskegee Airman. Oh, here we go. Yoo! Um, yes. So, this will take an account of the history where now you went on to work on a documentary about this unique unit at this unique period of time. What is your documentary project, and why did you choose to not only do the book but move into another expression of the media?
Well, I went backwards. I started this project for a documentary. So I was going around the country getting video, uh, interviews, and all. A book was not my first choice. I didn't even think I was going to do it, but because my background is in like broadcast journalism. And so
Mhm.
I was into the visual. And so I was going around doing the research, doing this because I wanted to do a documentary. Now, right now, we're in the beginning stages of the documentary. I'm working with a producer, so we haven't developed yet. How are we going to approach this? But in the meantime, I just thought, let me do a book. Let's see if anybody's interested in a book. So, I did a book proposal, sent it to this one, and I researched who was interested in like history, especially Tuskegee Airmen history. So I approached them. It was called New South Books. They were interested. So I said, give me a year to write it. See, I was going into the documentary. I wasn't going to write a book. So I said, okay, give me a year to write it. I wrote it. They published it. Actually, then they merged with the University of Georgia Press. So they're an imprint. New South Books is an imprint of the University of Georgia Press. And so after, I guess, a year or two, once, everything that had to be taken care of, I signed with them, and the book came out in 2023. So,
Now, what was it like for you to go on that journey? You were willing to pivot from working on the documentary to working on the book, but the point is, you were working on something which was an eye opener for you, not only about your mom's life, but a moment in history that was very important. What has that journey been like for you?
oh goodness, I started in 2008, really 2009. So all my efforts had been into, going wherever I could find the archives, talking to people, whatever. But it was like once the book came, someone wanted the book, that switched my direction because I was under contract and certain things were expected of me. And so I had to accomplish that. So then over, the past, I guess up until 2022, 2021, I was just pulling stuff together for the documentary. But what happened is, so if I have sound bites, interviews, I turn them into quotations for the book. So on the one hand, working on the documentary didn't hurt doing the book because I had that kind
But
of
it
information.
has to take some kind of stick-to-itiveness. Can you speak to that? Like, what did it take for you not to say, "You know what? Why me?"
Energy,
Or, "I don't have the time for it. I'm doing something
yeah,
else."
it took energy, but being a part in an environment of academia, some of my students became my interns who helped me with certain parts of the project. Other faculty member, this one faculty member, in another whole different area, he told me about uh, these people at the Smithsonian who did display designs because my book is not just about my book, it's multimedia. So I have a tabletop display, I have a PowerPoint presentation, I have a life-size statue of the nurses, and I learned about these from the Smithsonian. They showed me different things because the scrapbook I had, they said you can't take that around. So all these different steps, but it took time. And see, I was teaching and I was new to teaching, and that took a lot of time. So
Well, it wasn't the only thing you had to do in your life. What advice would you give to people who don't have the resources that you did, students and interns to help guide you? What advice would you give to other people if they wanna take on, uh, a project like you did?
get your relatives, talk to your
Get
relatives.
your relatives involved, that's a
Yeah,
good one.
like especially
In
if
other words, you don't think you have to do it on your own?
no,
Get to tell that story?
yeah, what you do is, first of all, at holidays, vacations, record. Record your family members, especially the older ones, but also the younger ones, because after a while, they will be part of history. When the future comes, their story needs to be told. So, these cameras, get the camera. It also has audio on most of these smart cameras and record. Just even ask everybody, get their permission. Put it on the table at Thanksgiving or any other holiday and just talk and just talk. Let one of your family members is a good typist. Let that person transcribe everything. And then you have another that person who he does the reunions. So at the reunion, you might say, okay, we want Aunt so and so to record, talk about this, blah, 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 blah. Today we're in multimedia, so everything doesn't have to be in a book. It could
Right.
it could be other forms of media that also will tell the story.
What do you think is the importance of doing that?
Because if you don't do it, you're gonna lose it. What I always say, and I always share, um, if you don't know your history, there's a danger in that. Simple, like if you didn't know you came from a family who had diabetes. So if you know that, health issues, but there are issues in families that they don't talk about. Good, bad, indifferent. There are things that you might not talk about, but you need to talk about and understand. So I was thinking about this recently. John Wilkes Booth, who allegedly assassinated Abraham Lincoln, right? I lived near one of the locations he stopped at. And I think I stopped by to look at it. And that was interesting history because even though he may be looked at a certain way and he's somebody's relative,
Yeah.
it's good to know certain things that happened in your family, even if it's to say, well, gee, what kind of politics was he into that he would do that? And
Yeah.
then that might get you thinking like, "You know what? Maybe I better take a look at this." Sometimes history is important for everybody, that you know not only your own history, but understand how your history can be part of someone else's history, and how you can prevent certain damage or certain things in your own family because you've learned your history.
You're aware of it, and that's an important message here from the author of this book called Memories of a Tuskegee Airman Nurse. So, if you we don't have much time any more time today to go into the importance of your experience or the advice we would give to others people's experience, but we will continue this conversation because it's important. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the importance of producing, recording our memories and our journey. And congratulations to you for the success and the ongoing effort that you make to not only bring your family's history to light for you and your family, but the historical importance that they lived through. If you pay a visit to the website Tuskegee, it's hard to say, even difficult to spell, but make an effort, TuskegeeArmyNurses.com, you will be able to
Oh,
get information about Pia's
it's
project.
dot info, info,
Oh,
dot
shoot.
info,
Sorry for that. Give me get
info.
TuskegeeArmyNurses.info. You will be able to get information about Pia's project where she's speaking and how you can get a copy of her book. I hope you're inspired and prepare your memoir because doing so will be of great benefit. Before we sign off today, I want to invite you to go to our website, which is www.decluttering55plus.com and go to the Let's Connect button to sign up for notifications and other activities in our neck of the woods. We talk about all kinds of topics here that will invigorate your life and help you create a legacy, not a mess. From health to technology, memoirs to social relationships, deciding where you're going to live and what you're going to do in retirement, and even your final arrangements. And let's not forget getting your financial house and legal papers in order. We aim to prompt you to get in action and get things done. Also, pick up a copy of Decluttering 55 Plus Wisdoms to Create a Legacy, Not a Mess at Amazon or www.layitflat.com. It's a spiral tabletop book that will support you to stay in action and invigorate your life. Once again, I thank you for joining us today, listening and watching and learning. Have a clutter-free day.